Good morning, Toronto. You! My name's Kathleen Drum, and I'm TIFF's Industry Director, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the 2017 TIFF Industry Conference. It's great to know that not just local filmmakers, but people from around the world are here today for the start of this 6-day event. You are all so very, very welcome. We are here today in the dynamic and culturally diverse city of Toronto. It's a city of immigrants, and more than 50% of the population were born in another country. It's also a city with a long history stretching back over time. Many lives have been lived, and many stories have come from this place. It's an honour for me to pay my respects to the original keepers of this land, the Mississaugas of New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. Thank you for hosting us here today and for hosting TIFF year-round. I would also like to acknowledge our wonderful sponsors and supporters who make everything that TIFF does possible. Our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal, Paris, and Visa, and our major industry supporters, the Ontario Media Development Corporation and Telefilm Canada, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. Happy birthday, Telefilm! Right now, there are three worlds orbiting the downtown hub of Toronto. There's the world of imagination and artistry at the Toronto International Film Festival, the world of business and media at the Industry Centre, and the world of creative and professional inspiration right here at the Glenn Gould Centre. Today, we begin 6 days packed with topical, provocative, important conversations. Our hard-working programming team has assembled a lineup of industry titans, acclaimed filmmakers, expert practitioners, disruptors, innovators, and cinema legends like Glenn Close, Larry Wilmore, Armando Iannucci, and Bong Joon-ho. It's going to be informative, and it's going to be fun. We know that you're here to learn and be inspired, and we know that you're also here to further your projects and make new business connections. So please make use of TIFF's 3 intersecting worlds to build your networks. Go to parties, hang out in festival streets, cafes and bars, and come along to our daily happy hours, which happen every night at 5:30 right in the lobby outside. We'd love you to go home with new friends and new contacts. And just a quick housekeeping note, please. No photography or video recording is allowed inside the studio. However, not to worry, because we are live streaming the conference to our website and YouTube channel. And please do tweet about our sessions and keep the conversation going with our online audience. This morning's guest speaker once said, "The worst crime you can commit with an audience is telling them something they already know. We are always running ahead." We couldn't be more excited to open the conference with a uniquely fast-paced, exceptional, and entertaining screenwriter who was at TIFF with his directorial debut. I'd now like to invite my wonderful creative collaborator and our industry conference programmer, Karina Rotenstein, who has the honour of welcoming the man himself.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kathleen. To all of you tuning in our live stream and all of you in this room, and there are a lot of you, you are exactly in the right place. We are so excited to welcome Aaron Sorkin to the venue. Welcome him. Isn't it awesome? Whether it's theater, film, television, the Academy Award-winning screenwriter, producer, playwright, showrunner, and he's the Miles Davis of dialogue. Aaron Sorkin has built a career authoring some of the most influential and original works of our time, including, but not limited to, A Few Good Men, The American President, Sports Night, The West Wing, Charlie Wilson's War, The Social Network, oh, those Winklevi, The Newsroom, Moneyball, and Steve Jobs. His pen has been in everything. Aaron Sorkin returns to TIFF to present the world premiere of his directorial debut, Molly's Game, which he also wrote, starring Jessica Chastain and Idris Elba. It's premiering tonight at 6 p.m. at the Elgin Theater, and let's just take a quick sneak peek, if we can. Yeah. Hosting this morning's masterclass is Carrie Craddock, the festival's director of programming and our resident Sorkin expert. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guests as they walk and talk to the stage, the wonderful Carrie Craddock and Aaron Sorkin.
I think we need more practice on our walk and talk for next time. Good morning, everybody. So that was Molly's Game. I hope you'll all get a chance to see the film during the festival or when it's released in theaters this November. But as a storyteller, Aaron, I'd like to start by asking you, what is the first story you remember hearing or reading, or the first one that inspired you to start writing?
First of all, that's a great question. I've never been asked that question. I'll tell you, the first time I remember being in a theater, I was backstage. I grew up in New York City, and a classmate of mine was I was about 4 years old at the time, and was the son of an actor named Herschel Bernardi, who took over from Zero Mostel and Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway. And one Sunday afternoon, we had a play date, and my friend had siblings who were my brothers and sisters' age, too. And I don't remember much, but there weren't any parents around, just the nanny. And the nanny had to kind of park us somewhere. And she put us backstage at the Imperial Theater on a Sunday afternoon during a matinee. So when all the other kids went off to play someplace, but I was mesmerized. I was standing backstage watching some guy sing Miracle of Miracles in profile. I couldn't see the audience. I couldn't quite understand what I was looking at, but I found it thrilling. And then that experience, that wasn't so much a story experience as I love being backstage and a theater experience. Story experience would come soon after that when my parents, who took me to the theater as a matter of habit, neither of them are in show business, but when they were growing up theater was kind of affordable back then. You could get a seat in the balcony for $3.50. So they would take my sister and brother and I to the theater as a matter of habit. And they took us to see Man of La Mancha, and it was the original production of Man of La Mancha. And I can really remember it very clearly, seeing the top of a bassoon coming out of the orchestra pit. Like there were live musicians down there. And then if any of you are familiar with Man of La Mancha, it has the scariest staircase in the history of storytelling. The whole thing takes place in a dungeon where the Spanish Inquisition is keeping people who are about to be executed. And when that staircase lowered on chains, it meant somebody was coming to be taken. And I remember that staircase coming down, and I remember every single thing about that show, and it has had a very long-lasting effect on me.
What was the first story you ever wrote?
You know, I never wrote for pleasure until right after I got out of college. Until then, writing for me was a chore to be gotten through for a school assignment. I got out of college where I'd studied theater. I moved to New York to begin my life as a struggling actor, which is what I thought I was. I had studied acting my whole life. I was working a whole bunch of survival jobs. I was bussing tables, bartending, handing out leaflets, dressed as a moose, anything to pay the rent and pay the phone bill. And my rent at the time was, I was sharing a very tiny studio apartment about the third the size of this stage. I was sharing this very tiny studio apartment with my ex-girlfriend, and I don't mean that she's now my ex-girlfriend. She was my ex-girlfriend then, when I was living with her, and she was dating my best friend. But these are the kinds of things that you just have to not care about when you're trying to get your foot in the door in a very expensive city. So for $250 a month, I got to live on her futon.
Bargain now.
And yeah, I'll say. One weekend, she was out of town doing she played Strawberry Shortcake in the Strawberry Shortcake tour. This is a character I don't know if Strawberry Shortcake exists anymore. Maybe parents with, I have a teenage daughter, maybe parents with very little kids would know, but
she's back.
Is she?
Yep.
All right. So my ex-girlfriend went out on the Strawberry Shortcake tour. This was a Friday night in New York that anyone who lives in a big city, whether it's New York or Toronto or any place else, you've had this night. It feels like everyone you know has been invited to a party that you haven't been invited to. Everyone's gone. For some reason, nothing in this little studio apartment that worked on electricity was working. Like the television wasn't working, the stereo wasn't working. This was about a year before Apple introduced this thing called a Macintosh. So there wasn't one of those, but what there was a high school friend of mine who was a struggling journalist. Had on that Friday with him his grandfather's semi-automatic typewriter. This is a typewriter with electric keys, but a manual return. He was going out of town for the weekend with his girlfriend and didn't want to schlep it around with him. So he asked me if I could hang on to this typewriter for him. So I said, sure. So I'm in the studio apartment, no friends around, the TV isn't working, the stereo isn't working, there's no such thing as the internet. For this story to really work, I guess I had to have to say there's no such thing as books yet either. Those hadn't been invented, but, and I didn't have $3 in my pocket. What I had was my friend's grandfather's semi-automatic typewriter, which also had paper in it. So the only way for me to entertain myself was to stick a piece of paper in this typewriter, and I did what I'd never done before, which was that I wrote in dialogue. And I started writing in dialogue, and I stayed up all night writing. That was the moment that I fell in love with the sound of my own voice. And started writing all night and felt a confidence doing it that I'd actually never felt with acting, even though I was a pretty cocky actor. But you know, that morning, invited a couple of friends over. And said, read this out loud for me, and they were very encouraging about it, and that's the first story I ever wrote.
It's interesting that one of your, your first memories of seeing a play or hearing a story, as you put it, was from backstage, because it seems to me that a lot of your work, you tend to be drawn to behind-the-scenes stories. Can you talk a little bit about, why those interest you so much, or what draws you to them?
Sure. I think it's the same thing that makes us want to know how a magic trick is done. I always, for instance, with The West Wing, I would say to the people I was working with, this is a show about the 5 minutes before and after what we see on CNN. And I think that you're right, that being 4 years old, standing backstage at the Imperial Theater and being fascinated by that made me want to write about those things. Look, everything, to some extent, everything is a behind-the-scenes story, whether it's behind the scenes at a hospital, behind the scenes at a law firm, behind the scenes at a police precinct, behind the scenes, of a family. If you're doing a kitchen sink drama. Everything is meant to be the part that we don't see in the store window. I just choose workplaces that have a kind of more pronounced facade, so it brings into relief the behind-the-scenes aspect.
So you mentioned being an actor before you discovered your talent for writing, but in another life, would you have been maybe a journalist, a politician, a lawyer, or any of the sort of stories and worlds that you create on screen, ones that you feel like you would be drawn to working in, or not at all?
Well, in a world where we get multiple lives and can start over and over, to be honest, I think I'd do this in every one of them. I love doing it.
So you should.
And thanks. I'm attracted to those professions that you just named, and I guess that my way of feeling like a journalist, feeling like a lawyer, feeling like a politician is by writing about them and writing, the newsroom or the law firm or the White House. I tend to write very romantically and idealistically. The quixotic version of those things.
Well, I wish that some of those real-life characters were more idealistic and romantic as you are.
Oh,
So we talked about, your influence or the influence of the theater on your work, and I'm wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about your first movie that you wrote, A Few Good Men, and since that was based on a play you wrote, and the process of adapting that, from the stage to the screen, and just a little bit about, what went into that.
Well, when the film rights for A Few Good Men were bought pretty quickly, and I was hired to write the screenplay. And at the time that I was hired to write the screenplay, not only had I never written a screenplay, I'd never read a screenplay. I honestly didn't know what one looked like or exactly how it worked. I loved movies as much as anyone. I went to movies as much as anyone. But whereas my friends who do what I do can tell you who the second assistant director was on every Hitchcock film and really can talk with great sophistication about films that I love, I'm not able to do that and was never able to do that. I'm only able to tell you that I love those films, and at this point I'm able to talk about the screenplays a little bit in a way that makes sense. I was that way with plays. I can tell you who the second assistant stage manager was on the original production of Golden Boy and that kind of thing. So the first thing I did in order to write this screenplay was I went to this place called the Drama Bookshop in New York on 7th Avenue, and I found a screenplay formatting book, a book that teaches you screenplay format. And after about 3 days, I threw it out the window because I just thought this can't be right. And again, this is before, now there's screenwriting software like Final Draft, which is, a screenplay is very format intensive. There wasn't that software. What there was a man who was already, I had never met him, he was already my mentor and then would become my actual mentor right around this time. A screenwriter named William Goldman, Bill Goldman, who won Academy Awards for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and All the President's Men, and wrote Marathon Man and The Princess Bride and Misery, and the list goes on and on. And my generation of screenwriters considers him to be the dean of American screenwriters. And I bought his book, which I would recommend to anybody, whether you're a screenwriter or a short order cook. It's such a good read. It's called Adventures in the Screen Trade, and you won't put it down. You'll read it in a night. And included in Adventures in the Screen Trade is his screenplay for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which was not at all like what I had seen in the screenplay formatting book. It was an incredibly readable screenplay. Whereas, and I also, in addition to the screenplay book, the producers of the movie in the studio, knowing this was my first screenplay, they sent me a bunch of screenplays that were current at the time. I remember they sent me Rain Man and a few others. And I saw that, a lot of screenplays, and I recognized that a screenwriter, a playwright, a television writer, that we don't write things that are meant to be read, we write things that are meant to be performed, right? So it's, however, the screenplays that I was reading, other than Bill's, other than Butch Cassidy, felt more like a blueprint, like a set of instructions for the making of a movie. Bill wanted you to have the movie experience while writing the screenplay. So he did away with unnecessary stuff like cut to, for instance. I'll only use cut to if rhythmically you want that beat there to get to if that's what you want the audience to feel. So when I'm writing the screenplay, I want whoever is reading it, the studio, a director, an actor, I want to come as close to the experience that you're going to feel in the theater as possible. I want to put that on the page. But with A Few Good Men, with my first, I didn't know how to do any of that yet, and I clung to sort of the Bill Goldman version of writing a screenplay. you know, people would say they would have seen the play and then said to me, okay, how are you going to open it up? How are you going to open it up? And I had no answer except, I don't know exactly what you mean, and I don't think I am gonna open it up. It takes place, like most of the things I write, in offices, in a courtroom. I really like four walls. I like a little puppy that you buy a crate for, where it's supposed to be only big enough for the puppy to be able to turn around and no more, because it makes them feel secure. I'm going to get off this. I'm not comfortable comparing myself to a cute puppy. But I wrote it that way, and now I write everything that way. And to this day, by the way, we'll get the same objections. You know, gee, this with Steve Jobs, for instance. Steve Jobs opened 2 years ago next month, but if you go right now, you can still be among the first to see it. Steve Jobs takes place entirely indoors and entirely in one building, and I was perfectly comfortable with that. In spite of the my gods, and moreover, Danny Boyle, the director, was perfectly comfortable with that. So,
well, and then I mean, in that particular film, I think in the two cases, I think where you do open it up, it has such, I think, a bigger impact, you know, for that reason that you've been contained the whole time. Speaking of Danny Boyle and, you know, Rob Reiner and other directors that you've worked with, at what point do you involve them in the process for stuff that you're not directing, or the actors?
Okay, well, everything has been stuff that I didn't direct up until now.
Yeah.
I want the director to come in. I want the screenplay to be as finished as it can be before the director comes in. I want it to be as good as it can be before anybody sees it. I want the reaction to be, let's make this movie now. Let's attach a director. Let's start casting it. Now I'll end up doing work. I think David Fincher is a good example with The Social Network. That became a greenlit movie right away. Fincher was on board right away. He would come to my house, or I would go to his office, and we would do what's just called turning pages. We'd go from page to page, just make sure that we were metaphorically both on the same page. And he would suggest small changes. And he would make it clear that it's a suggestion, that he's not telling me to do this. But it would be a David Fincher suggestion, which is to say, I'll beat you up so that I like involving the director in the process at the time when they can be the director and not the script editor, not a co-author.
Right. And can you talk a little bit about how your process differs when you're writing for television versus feature films? I think there's a quote from Bradley Whitford that says something like, nobody will ever do what you did again, which was write 22 episodes a year for The West Wing for 4 years in a row. That's something like 11 movies a year or something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot. I will say this, though. The generation before me, they were doing 36 Gilligan's Islands a year, and they were able to maintain that level of quality week to week, okay? It was the difference between writing for television and writing movies, and I love them both, and I love writing plays, and I'm very lucky that I get to do all three. But the difference in television is time. If I'm working on a screenplay, and I've run into trouble. I've driven myself into a snowbank. I'm lost. It's not working. I have writer's block. I can call the studio, call the producer, call whoever it is that's waiting for it, and say, I know I said I was going to deliver in August. It's probably going to be more like October or November, and they may not be happy about it, but that's the way it's going to be. And as a matter of fact, they're generally understanding. With an episode of television, you have a concrete deadline, you have an air date that you have to meet. And as a result, and this is the big downside of television, you have to write even when you're not writing well. With that screenplay that I said I was going to deliver in August, but it won't be until October and November, the reason for that is I'm writing badly and I have to put it down and stop because I'm writing badly. And with the episode of television, you can't stop. You have to write even though you're writing badly, and then you have to put it on the table for the cast and the crew so you can have a table read, and then you have to point a camera at it, and then you have to broadcast it to everybody every week, even though you know that you struggled with this and that it's not your best, and that's a tough pill to swallow.
How do you know when you have it, when something's great? And you mentioned writer's block, and that actually brings me to one of my other questions. For all those screenwriters or aspiring screenwriters in the room, what do you do to cure it?
Well, for about 10 years, I was a drug addict. I'm here to tell, I mean, I can joke about it now, but I'm here to tell you that if anyone thinks, I went to, I've 18 years clean now. Before I went to a great place in Minnesota called the Hazelden Center and got clean there. And before I went, I got a call from someone I'd never met before, never spoken to before, Carrie Fisher, who called me out of the blue to say, I know you think that you're not going to be able to write as well without drugs. I promise you, you're going to write better. And turns out she was 100% right. So that's the wrong thing to do about writer's block. For me, it's just time doing its thing. You know, first of all, again, I stop. If it's, if I'm flying along, if basically, if the only thing holding me back is the speed at which I type, then it's going well. If it's coming out like ketchup out of a bottle, it's not, okay? It means you haven't nailed down the intention and the obstacle in the scene. Those are the things that you need. That point of friction. Somebody wants something standing in their way of getting it. They want the money, they want the girl, they want to get to Philadelphia, they want to open a bottle of ketchup. It doesn't matter. As long as there is a formidable obstacle in their way, and the tactics that they use to overcome that obstacle, that's going to be who your character is. So like I said, if it is coming out like molasses, you don't have it, and you shouldn't sit there trying to think of the next line. Get up, get in your car, drive. This is what I do. I drive around, I listen to music, I climb the walls. I'm a sports fan, I'll watch sports. Writer's block is not a condition that lasts forever. It only feels like it's going to last forever.
When Karina introduced us, she described you as the Miles Davis of dialogue. I understand that you like to...
I really like the sound of that.
Yeah. I understand you like to listen to music a lot while you're writing, and that you're very physical about maybe like acting out some of the parts while you write. Can you talk a little bit about?
Sure. I don't listen to music while I'm actually writing. I listen to music, which is to say I don't listen to music while I'm typing.
Okay.
But I do. For some reason, my car is the place that I listen to music. I rarely have music on in my house. And I listen to music that I listened to when I was in high school, because my taste in almost everything, music, food, just stopped maturing the moment I graduated from high school. So I listen to that music, and it kind of puts me, I don't know, it puts me in a place. Sometimes I'll just say, hey, that's a piece of music that I would really like to have serve as score for a scene that I haven't written. So write a scene where you can end with, Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms, that kind of thing. Write that scene. So it'll work a little bit that way. Yes, I am very physical when I'm writing. I play all the parts. I'm doing a lot of talking out loud. If it's going well, I'm jumping up and down from my desk, walking around. I once broke my nose writing because it was late at night. I'd gone to bed, but I got up because this was during the newsroom. I got up because I thought of something. I got unstuck with something good. So I was kind of sleepy. I jotted a note down, and I thought that note isn't good enough, and I went into the little office I keep at home and wrote a sort of longer note to myself in email, and that note turned into dialogue. And it was a simple comic beat that we've actually seen 1,000 times before, but it's durable. Jeff Daniels is about to lose his mind, just go crazy at something that a staffer did, and he lunges at the staffer, and another staffer holds him back, and it's one of these I'm gonna, kind of moments. So I was performing it. I was doing it, and I did the Jeff Daniels lunge, and I was there's a little bathroom in my little home office, and I was in there. I was walking around, but I happened to be in there at the moment that I did it, and I did the lunge, and there was nobody to hold me back, so I slammed right into the mirror,
oh dear,
really hard. If it had been a Scorsese movie, he would have said, all right, good, let's go again, but this time less blood. My nose was swelling up, it was blood everywhere, it was clear there was a problem. So I called the friend that you call at midnight when you've accidentally broken your nose writing.
We all have one of those.
Yeah. She came over and looked at me and said, I got to take you to the emergency room. And I said, yeah, okay, but just do me a favor, read this scene, because I think I nailed it. Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit now about Molly's Game. As you mentioned, this is the first film you've directed and written. So how did it come to be? And had you always wanted to direct a film, and why this one?
I think I was all we could afford. Listen, I've known I started working on Molly's Game 3 years ago. Took me a little over a year to write the screenplay, so I've known for about 2 years that I was going to need a succinct, brief, coherent answer to that question. And I still don't have one. I'll say this. That's not I don't even have a phone on me. Oh, okay.
We're good.
I didn't write the screenplay with the intention of directing it. It was But from the moment I started thinking about Molly's Game, which was the moment I met Molly, Molly Bloom, I knew this, that, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find a way to say this without it appearing as if I'm calling other people dumber than myself. I knew this. I knew that there were dozens and dozens of very attractive ways to do Molly's Game. I don't want to say wrong, but differently, okay? There were a lot of shiny objects in Molly's Game. The money, the glamour, the movie stars, the sexiness, the decadence. There were, and that wasn't the movie that I was seeing. Those things would all sort of be background extras in this movie, but talking to Molly, and after that first meeting with Molly, that turned into 6 months of almost every day talking to Molly, and hearing the differences between what she wrote in the book and what really happened, or what was left out of the book entirely. Listening to stories about Molly and her family, and particularly Molly and her father. This won't mean very much to you without having seen the film, none of which is in the book. There was a movie that I wanted to write, which was not the movie you would sort of instantly think that this was. If you hear the one-line story of young woman hosts A-list stars in an underground poker game. And I just became very protective of that idea. And listen, the reason why I'm talking like this is because I love working with great directors. I love the relationships, both personal but professional, creative relationships that I've had with David Fincher and with Danny Boyle, Mike Nichols, Bennett Miller. And I want to continue doing that. And I've always, frankly, I've cringed just a little bit whenever I've heard a screenwriter say, well, you know, I decided to direct myself to protect my screenplay. Right. I was like, protected from whom? And I don't want my screenplay protected from Mike Nichols. I come in and do
your thing.
Yeah, and do it with me. Yeah. Tell me how to make it better, and I'll go do that. The movie will be better, and I'll have had this incredible experience with Mike Nichols. I'll have learned from Mike. And same with all the others. But in this particular case, I just felt very strongly about the tone of the film, of what was important in this story, of the fact that it wasn't a poker movie, right, that there would be poker in it, just like there would be wallpaper in certain scenes. But even then, I didn't go to the producers and say, I want to direct the movie. They came to me. It was one night we had met at a restaurant for dinner. We all had in front of us a piece of paper with a list of directors on it. We went through each director name by name, pros and cons. And when we got to the end, Mark Gordon, Amy Pascal, Matt Jackson, the producers said, but we think you should direct it. It was a scary proposition, to be sure. And even though it took me weeks to say yes definitively, I knew the moment they suggested it that I was going to say yes, that I was going to do it. It was going to take me a while to get comfortable with it. It was going to take me a while to, I went and started talking to all the writers turned directors that I knew, Jim Brooks and Adam McKay and a whole bunch of people, all of whom were incredibly encouraging, saying, you think you're not ready, you are. I would explain to them, you know, in 25 years, I've managed to pick up none of the science of filmmaking. I couldn't pick a long lens out of a police lineup if I have to. I know I like the way it looks when you use a long lens. And they said, you're not going to have to worry about that. And sure enough, while given the education that I got directing Molly's Game, I would love a chance to direct it all over again. But you know, I had this conversation with Charlotta Christensen, who was our director of photography. And, you know, when I met with her, she came heavily recommended. She had just shot Girl on a Train. She had just shot Fences, Far from the Maddening Crowd. And I met with her and said, you know, listen, you know, basically what I just told you, that I don't know anything about the science of filmmaking, and that we would have to establish some kind of vocabulary where we can talk to each other, and you will have to have Herculean patience with me. It's not going to be a problem at all. There's this handheld thing, and if I think it'll look good with a 60, I'll slap a 60 on it, hand it to you. You can look right at the scene and just tell me if you like it. I thought, really? That's how we made the movie.
You talked about really getting to know Molly Bloom throughout this process and wanting to stay sort of true to the parts of her story that weren't necessarily in her book. How did your collaboration with Jessica Chastain work, and what was the process like of casting her and, you know, working with her and Molly together?
I love Jessica. I loved her before we did this movie, even though I'd never met her. Actually, I think I shook hands with her once. I don't know why I said it like that. I know I shook hands with her once. I just don't think she remembers. And Jessica is who I wanted from the beginning. She was absolutely my first choice for a wide variety of reasons. What became particularly important was once you've gotten past, yes, you have cast the right actor in this part. If you cast somebody once said that casting is 90% of the battle. I think whoever said that is dramatically underestimating the importance of casting. If you cast something wrong, you will spend the rest of your time, the rest of the rehearsal of the play, the rest of the making of the movie, the rest of the life of the television series, you will spend the rest of your time dealing with the fact that you have cast that part incorrectly. It's not at all the actor's fault. They're a terrific actor who worked hard. You cast it wrong. Jessica was cast beautifully. I was super smart to make that decision. I really can't give myself enough credit. But here's what became very important. Like every movie, we didn't have as much money as we needed to make the movie, okay? Nobody was being cheap or anything. This is how movies get made. And so there was no rehearsal time at all. Again, this will mean more to you after you see the movie, but Jessica and Idris have about a half a dozen very play-like scenes. It's just the two of them in Idris's office. Yep. He's her criminal defense lawyer. And those are the kinds of scenes that you need rehearsal for, that you wish you had a preview period like on Broadway, because you need repetition. You need the actors to be able to, there's a lot of language You need them to be able to casualize this language, to have ownership of it, and that really only happens after repetition. That's the difference between memorizing your lines, which is what you do in high school, and having ownership of it, being able to toss it off like you're just saying your phone number. And that was missing from our budget. And that was unacceptable. There's no point in doing the movie. There's no point in casting Jessica and Idris and Kevin Costner, Michael Cera, Bill Camp, Chris O'Dowd, all these great actors, if you can't allow them at least a chance to do their best. I was given that chance. I didn't show anybody a page of this until I thought I've done my best. Right. So the best I could do was about 4-6 weeks before the start of shooting, I started virtual rehearsal with the actors, where either email, Skyping, sometimes on the phone, we would go through the rehearsal process, scene by scene. We would talk through everything. I would kind of write them a brief essay on what was important in the scene right now, where that transition was that they were going to have to make. But none of that would have mattered at all if Jessica and Idris did not show up every day completely prepared, not just having memorized their lines, but owning it. And those scenes that I was talking about, those scenes that take place in Idris's office, those are because of Idris's schedule. They were all shot in a row. Those were the very first scenes that we shot, and every day, and it was one shooting day per scene. Every day, anytime there was any kind of break, a lighting change, anything like that, Idris and Jessica would be working on tomorrow's scene. They already owned today's scene. They'd be working on tomorrow's scene. So what you got with Jessica, who's in every scene in the movie, what you got from Jessica was not only a terribly skilled actor with, she went to Juilliard, one of the finest trained actors in the world, and a very special actor that brings to it her own brand of magic. What you get is a very hard worker, and more than that you can't ask for.
Matched by your hard work, I imagine. We now have time for a few questions from the audience. There are mics that will be passed around, so we'll try to go from one side to the other. And we will start with just, yes, in the middle with your hand up, your hair is up. Yep.
Hi, thank you so much. I mean, I can't believe all the drama you've written. You are such a funny guy.
Oh, that's really nice of you to say.
A lot of chuckles. You mentioned you have a teenage daughter, and you know that thing where you don't know what it's like until you're actually in the situation? So being a parent and so many things, you're like, oh, I get it now. Is there something about being a director now that you had that feeling where all those movies that you wrote and you saw, and you thought, well, I might have done that differently, or how did that work? Did you get that sense?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the question. And I've never written anything, a movie, a play, an episode of television. I've never written anything that I didn't wish I could have back and write again. And I'll bet you everyone feels that way. I can't believe that I'm alone doing that. And yes, there were plenty of times during the process of directing Molly's Game where I wanted to call all the directors I've ever worked with and say, I'm sorry. I didn't know. You get, we also, by the way, and we shot, most of Molly's Game was shot right here on stages in Toronto, over at Pinewood. And I have to say, it was the best crew I've ever been a part of. Without a doubt, we come for the tax break, but the province of Ontario in the city of Toronto could charge more and we would still come because of the crews. They are phenomenally talented, but the spirit is so great to see. I'm a big morale guy, and you love it when the boom operator is as engaged in making the movie as you are or anyone else. So that's an unrepayable debt that I owe to them. That said, it's just part of the part of directing. It turns out is you are making a decision every 8 seconds. Someone is saying to you the red scarf or the blue scarf, this and that. And now I understand. My very first director was Rob Reiner on A Few Good Men. And I noticed about a week before shooting started on A Few Good Men that he began to wear the same thing every day. Khakis and a white button-down shirt. And so after day 4 or 5, I said, Rob, I've noticed that you've started wearing the same thing every day. Is it superstition now? And he said, no, it's because when you're directing, you make so many decisions throughout the day. I don't want to start my morning with one. I've got a closet full of Gap khakis, a closet full of white shirts. That's what I'm wearing. I'm not staring at my closet and thinking, what should I do?
Okay, well, we'll try to go to this side of the audience towards the back in black. Yeah.
Hi. I was just curious about your writing process. It seems like because you're so dialogue-driven that you'd maybe be the kind of writer that just sits down and kind of lets the characters talk. But as you've moved into screenwriting, it's so structured. What's the role of outlining in your process? Is it there, and how kind of detailed do you get with that?
I've never outlined before. I use index cards a lot. It just kind of organizes my mind. I've never index carded the whole movie because I don't think I've ever, at the point when I've started writing a screenplay, known everything that there is to know about the whole movie. I've figured out how it's going to start, and I have some other things along the way, but it's kind of like walking in the dark with a flashlight. You can really only see as far ahead of you as the light goes. So before I'm able to let the characters talk, as you said, I'll just go back to this because of how critically important it is, how fundamental it is. I'm not making this up. Aristotle made this up, okay? And he's right. And if you buy it, it's not even a book. It's like a pamphlet. It's about 64 pages long, called The Poetics, Aristotle's Poetics. He lays out the rules of drama. So I worship at the altar of intention and obstacle. If I know what that is in the first scene, and I've done enough pacing around and can start to, it starts to feel right. I can hear it. It makes sense. There's a clear intention and obstacle. I try to get kind of as loaded up on that as I can, and then I write, and I write as quickly as I can. Those nights where I'm smashing my face into the mirror because I'm so physical in doing it, it's because I can't type as fast as I'm writing now in my head, and I don't want to stop. So once you get to that point, start writing, I really believe that the energy makes its way onto the page.
Okay, we have time for one final question. Your hand shot up right away in the front row, so I'm going to go to you.
Thanks. Nice to writing. And I'm just wondering, because you tend to act out as you write, like just coming back from an acting background, other than yourself, who do you think has been the best at performing your prose the way that you intended?
Well, I'm the luckiest person in the world. Really, I am. I just catch a lot of breaks. And one of them is the casts of actors that I've worked with have been fantastic. So I'm not going to crown one person as the person who could do that. I'll say this. If we were in gym class and some captains had been picked and we're choosing sides for a movie we're going to make or a play we're going to do or a television series that we're going to do, we don't know what it is, okay? But we're each going to choose the actors that we want on our side. Well, then, if I were able to choose Allison Janney, Felicity Huffman, Brad Whitford, Richard Schiff, Jeff Daniels, the entire cast of The Social Network, they've all been great. You know, they've all been great, and I'm indebted to them. It's and here's why: because they come in respecting the language, and they want to get it right, and they don't mind coming to me and saying, "Listen, can you do me a favor? Say this line for me. I know that you did it right when you wrote it in your office. Just say it for me." They're fantastic about it. I did discover when I was directing that I do not give the actors an opportunity to breathe while they're speaking. I'm working on that particular flaw in my style, but I'm very grateful, and particularly just because it's most recently the cast of Molly's Game. Jessica takes the movie on her back, straps it to her back in the first scene, and runs with it, does not let go of it until the credits roll at the end, as you'll see, I hope. But Idris, Kevin Costner, Bill Camp, Chris O'Dowd, Jeremy Strong, Michael Cera, they were, each and every one of them, and I'm sure I'm leaving people out, each and every one of them fantastic, and if you replaced any one of them with someone else, it would diminish the movie.
Well, you are indebted to your actors, and we are indebted to you, I think, for everything you've done for the screen and for coming and sharing all of these insights with us today. I hope you guys all get a chance to see Molly's Game, and thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all. We're off to a great start, aren't we? Thank you, Aaron, so much.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you. At 11 o'clock, we have our next panel up. If you are interested in the future of cinema and emerging technologies, come back here at 11 o'clock. Get a quick coffee, come back here in the studio. Thank you.